Welcome back to the Impact Ledger, the podcast where we decode the money, metrics, and motivations driving the nonprofit and social finance sectors. I'm your host, Carlton Barrow-Reed III from Meeker Studio. If you've been following our series on outcome-based financing, you know we've been on a run. We've been on a bit of a journey. In episode 1, we looked at how traditional social impact bonds often turn social workers into spreadsheet managers, chasing rigid metrics just to survive. In episode 2, we introduced the antidote, or one of them. Community-driven outcomes contracts, or CDOCs, which put the power of defining success back into the hands of the people actually living the reality. In that episode, I briefly mentioned a group in Massachusetts called the Boston Ujima Project. Today, we are popping the hood and looking at the engine of that exact project, because what they are doing goes so far beyond just tweaking the government contract. They are attempting to entirely rewrite the rules of modern capitalism. They are building what they call a solidarity economy, a transformative concept that has been extensively explored by publications like Nonprofit Quarterly. But before we dive into the deep end of the financial pool, I want to do a quick interactive thought experiment with you. Wherever you are right now, unless you're driving, just close your eyes for a second. Imagine you live in a working class neighborhood. A massive vacant lot on your street has just gone up for sale. You and your neighbors desperately want it to be a fresh grocery store or a community center or a worker-owned cooperative, but a massive multi-billion-dollar real estate developer from 3 states away wants to turn it into luxury condos that nobody in your zip code can afford. In a traditional capitalist system, the developer wins 100 times out of 100. Why? Because the golden rule of traditional finance is that whoever holds the most capital gets the most votes. Money dictates the future of the neighborhood. All right, open your eyes. What if you could legally rewrite that rule? What if you could build an investment fund where the size of your bank account had absolutely zero bearing on the power of your vote? That isn't a hypothetical utopia. That is exactly what the Boston Ujima Project has actually built. To understand why Ujima exists, you have to understand the macroeconomic context of Boston. As highlighted in a fantastic article from shareable.net titled Racism and Finance Has Sparked a Grassroots Response, Boston is a city defined by an utterly staggering, persistent racial wealth divide. And let's be clear, the disparity isn't an accident. It is the downstream, mathematically predictable result of 20th century public policies, things like the racially exclusionary implementation of the GI Bill, decades of brutal redlining, and predatory lending practices. The system worked exactly as it was designed to work. But Boston also has a rich, fierce history of resistance to that system. According to local historical archives and Ujima's own foundational literature, back in 1968, black laborers who had been unjustly fired from a construction project in Roxbury organized themselves. Yes, they organized themselves. They held strategic meetings at Freedom House. They picketed. They called themselves the United Community Construction Workers, co-founded by Chuck Turner, who later became a foundational figure in Ujima. They forced the integration of black workers onto local construction sites. Ujima, which takes its name from the Swahili in the celebrated Kwanzaa principle, translates to collective work and responsibility. This is the modern crystallization of that exact legacy. They realized that traditional top-down philanthropic venture capital interventions are completely insufficient to rectify systemic inequality because they never transfer actual decision-making power to the community starved of capital. So they built a democratic member-run organization to do it themselves. Actually, let's do our live poll right now. If you're listening on Spotify, scroll down to the Q&A section on your app. If you're on Substack, jump to the comments. Here's my question for you this week. Have you ever felt completely politically and economically disenfranchised from the development? Have you ever felt completely politically and economically disenfranchised from the development happening in your own zip code? Have you ever watched a building go up and thought, who actually asked for this? Let me know your thoughts down below. Let's look at how Ujima fixes that disenfranchisement. The structural hallmark of the Boston Ujima Project is its rigid, uncompromising adherence to economic democracy. And they achieve this through a brilliant mechanism, the 2-tiered membership model. In a normal investment fund, if you put in $1 million, you get 1 million votes. If you put in $50, you basically get ignored. Ujima violently severs the link between capital size and voting power. They have voting members. To be a voting member, you must be a current working-class Boston resident of color, a displaced former resident who is gentrified out of the city, a grassroots partner, or a local employee. Every voting member gets exactly one vote, regardless of whether they invested $50 or $5,000. They hold the exclusive authority to approve or reject investments. Then they have solidarity members. These are external investors, wealthy philanthropic foundations, and accredited institutional investors from outside the neighborhood. Solidarity members provide vital capital liquidity. They provide the big bucks, but here's the kicker. Solidarity members are explicitly legally denied voting rights on capital deployment. They can put their money in, but they cannot buy political power over the neighborhood. And now here is our first Gemini insight. According to a detailed study published on ResearchGate analyzing ecosystem-based innovation and community control capital, the governance architecture of the Boston Ujima Project effectively neutralizes the primary critique of modern venture philanthropy, elite capture. By legally decoupling financial contribution from voting authority, Ujima prevents high net worth individuals and institutional foundations from dictating the aesthetic and economic priorities of marginalized communities. Furthermore, by explicitly including displaced individuals who have been gentrified out of Boston within the voting member tier, Ujima actively combats the political erasure that traditionally accompanies economic displacement, allowing former residents a democratic voice in shaping the future of their historical neighborhoods. Carlton here. Exactly. They insulated the ballot box from the bank account. So how do they decide where the money goes? They don't use financial analysts locked in a high-rise. They use participatory allocation in neighborhood assemblies. Drawing inspiration from global participatory budgeting models, Ujima holds hyper-localized forums. Residents gather and legally map out what their neighborhood needs. Maybe it's waste management. Maybe it's fresh food access. Then they nominate specific local enterprises they wish to see supported, officially designating them as businesses we love. If a nominated business passes the community vetting process, they apply to the Ujima Good Business Alliance and become eligible for hard capital from the Ujima Fund. And let's talk about the Ujima Fund, because the financial engineering here is absolutely mind-blowing. Launched in 2018, public filings show the fund reached its initial goal of $4.5 million in 2021. By 2023, according to their 990 tax reports, which you can pull up on platforms like Instrumental, they're deploying over $1.6 million a year into local businesses. But it's how they structure the risk that makes them famous. They call it capital stack equity. If you're not a financer, and let me explain the traditional capital stack. In normal global markets, investors who take on the highest risk get the highest potential financial returns. That makes sense to Wall Street, but Ujima's leadership fundamentally changed the philosophical definition of risk. They looked at the data. According to municipal census data cited in Ujima's founding documents, in the 14 Boston neighborhoods Ujima focuses on, the average per capita income is a mere $40,000 a year. In Boston's wealthy neighborhoods, it's almost double that. Ujima argued that for a working-class resident in Dorchester making $40,000, a $100 investment represents a vastly greater financial risk and sacrifice than a $10,000 made from a wealthy accredited venture capitalist. So Ujima actively inverted the traditional capital stack. At the top of the stack, taking the lowest risk but getting the highest expected rate of return are the working class, non-accredited local investors putting anywhere from $50,000 to $10,000. In the middle, taking moderate risk for a moderate market-adjacent return are the wealthy, accredited institutional investors. And at the very bottom of the stack, taking the absolute highest risk for the lowest financial return are philanthropic foundations and grants. The bottom tier acts as a loan loss reserve. If a local business defaults on a loan from Ujima, the philanthropic grant money is wiped out first to cover the loss. This structural buffer actively shields the working class members from working their $50 or $100 investment. Time for our second Gemini insight. The inverted capital stack equity model engineered by Ujima serves a dual macroeconomic purpose. First, by using philanthropic capital as a first loss guarantee, it significantly reduces the psychological and financial barriers to entry for low-income residents looking to invest in their own communities. Second, it systemically prevents the prevention of wealth inequalities that routinely occur in traditional community development, where high net worth individuals extract the vast majority of the profits generated by local revitalization efforts. In Ujima's model, the highest yields are structurally directed back into the working class tax base. Carlton here. It's brilliant. It turns philanthropy from a passive charity into an active, protective shield for working class wealth generation. And the capital deployed by Ujima is aggressively conditional. To get the money, a business must join the Ujima Good Business Alliance and commit to 36 distinct community good business standards. If you look at Ujima's published framework online, you'll see these aren't just suggestions. They are rigorous community-enforced regulations. Businesses must pay a living wage. They must provide resources for health insurance, even if they are legally too small for federal mandates to apply. They have to implement zero waste plans and conduct annual energy audits. Retail businesses must even have to make voter registration cards available at the register to actively promote civic engagement. Let's look at a deeply detailed case study of this in action using data from Ujima's own public impact reports. Comfort Kitchen, a business. At any rate, Comfort Kitchen is a restaurant operated by Bipla Rai and Nyako Pearl Perry. In 2023, Ujima voting members approved an initial $200,000 loan to them. The company voted for them because of the restaurant's commitment to equitable wages. Its miraculous survival through COVID-19 without firing its core staff and a strategic plan to eventually transition to a worker-owned cooperative is amazing. Fast forward to 2026, Comfort Kitchen is a massive critical success. They were named Best New Restaurant by Boston Magazine, landed on the New York Times Top 50 list, and got a James Beard nomination. So Ujima proposed a massive follow-on investment of $353,000 to fund Comfort Kitchen and two new sister ventures. According to Ujima's internal data on participatory allocation, the 2026 ballot for this investment was a historic milestone for economic democracy. It achieved a massive 67.89% voter turnout, with 91% of the community voting to approve. The $353,000 investment. But here's why this model is truly magical. In a normal venture capital deal, the investor just writes a check and helps people buy the product. But Ujima's participatory model actually quantifies the community buy-in as a tangible risk mitigating asset. During that 2026 vote, the community members didn't just vote on the loan. They committed to secondary support actions to guarantee the business would survive. 68% pledged to physically attend events at the restaurant. 62% pledged to utilize their personal networks to spread the word. 17% committed to buying gift cards. This multifaceted support infrastructure effectively de-risks the financial loan by guaranteeing a dedicated, highly loyal, built-in consumer base from day one. And Ujima goes far beyond just flat currency. They recognize that financial capital is just one form of power. As highlighted in a nonprofit quarterly piece titled Reimagining the Economy, the Social Justice Enterprise, they operate a robust time bank, a mutual credit system where individuals exchange skills without the exchange of money. If you provide 1 hour of service, you get 1 hour accredited to your account. You can trade language lessons, cooking, DJing, or computer repair. Under this framework, the labor of a highly paid IT specialist is valued exactly the same as the labor of a neighborhood home cook. It democratizes the very concept of labor value. They also integrate artists and cultural workers into their governance. During the historic 2026 Comfort Kitchen ballot, internal polling revealed that over 18% of the participating voters identified as artists. Ujima recognizes that cultural workers shape the political language and shared symbols necessary for a new economy to actually take root in the public imagination. But as always on this podcast, we have to put our skeptical hats on. What are the risks? What are the vulnerabilities of this highly experimental model? First is the paradox of philanthropic dependency. The genius of the inverted capitalist stack completely relies on a continuous injection of philanthropic grants to maintain that critical loan loss reserve. If a macroeconomic recession hits, causing local businesses to default while simultaneously causing progressive foundations to shrink their grant-making budgets, Ujima's protective shield could evaporate. The organization's ability to operate an autonomous solidarity economy is paradoxically structurally subsidized by the very institutional wealth hoarding it conceptually opposes. Second is democratic friction and voter fatigue. True economic democracy is exhausting. It is administratively burdensome. Ujima requires its working class members to attend multi-hour assemblies, review complex financial underwriting memos, debate 36 environmental standards, and vote. Maintaining quorum is a constant grinding administrative challenge. Third is sectoral risk. A massive portion of Ujima's high-profile investments, including Comfort Kitchen and Zero Cooperative, are in the food and hospitality sectors. Statistically, the restaurant industry is one of the most volatile, high-attrition sectors in the American economy, characterized by razor-thin margins. While community buying mitigates some risk, a restaurant is still a restaurant, and the systemic hazards of the hospitality industry remain a persistent threat to the fund's overall solvency. Here is our final Gemini insight. A broader philosophical critique of the Boston Ujima Project centers on the inherent tension between scaling operations and maintaining ideological purity. As discussed in a paper on solidarity economy as ontological politics published on the National Center for Biotechnology Information's PMC archive, scholars frequently caution about these limits. Traditional investment funds achieve scale and minimize risk by progressively increasing the size of their transaction tickets. If the Ujima Fund were to pursue traditional capitalist scaling methodology to reduce its administrative overhead, it would be forced to write massive checks to larger corporations, fundamentally precluding it from meeting the micro-capital needs of its target demographic. Scholars writing for Nonprofit Quarterly echo this, warning that pursuing scale at the expense of localized relational care leads to community movements highly vulnerable to state co-optation, or absorption by the very multinational monopolies they seek to dismantle. Carlton here. It is a classic dilemma. How do you get big enough to change the world without becoming the thing you hate? Which brings us to Carlton's Corner and my 2 cents for the day. The Boston Ujima Project is messy. It is administratively exhausting. It is financially experimental and it is completely, utterly beautiful. It represents one of the most sophisticated and ambitious models of a post-capitalist economy currently functioning in the U.S. By successfully integrating grassroots political organizing, participatory budgeting, non-extractive finance, and cultural production, they have empirically proven a point that Wall Street desperately hopes you never realize. You do not need a master's degree in finance to know what your neighborhood needs. You do not need a billionaire savior to allocate capital. It's entirely possible to democratize the financial underwriting process and place the levers of capital allocation directly in the hands of the working class. Their capital equity stack model is a profound, actionable challenge to orthodox financial risk assessment. It proves that we can design financial products that protect the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. But it requires communities willing to navigate the grueling, frustrating complexities of shared governance. It requires redefining what we consider a return on investment, and it requires committing to the rigorous, highly unglamorous, and ongoing work of collective responsibility. And furthermore, just off the top of my head, it makes me think about maybe AI could, with possibilities of AI as a idea generator, but also, it's just the future of innovation means that they can continue to innovate. They can continue to innovate on their current model, and my hope is that their next innovation mitigates the risks, or at least one of them that we just discussed in this podcast, so that not only are they becoming a better, more perfect fund, but they help our country become a better, more perfect union in the world, because their success is the world's success. That's it for this episode of the Impact Ledger. Now, before we go, I have a very specific challenge for every single person listening to the sound of my voice right now. We've talked a lot about over the last 3 episodes about how the system is broken, how we can fix it. Now it's time to actually do something about it. I want you to find the contact information for your local city council member, your state representative, or your governor. I want you to write them an email or send them a letter. You don't have to be a policy expert. Just tell them you learned about the Boston Ujima Project and the concept of participatory budgeting. Challenge them to implement community-controlled capital funds in your municipality. Tell them you are tired of distant developers deciding the future of your streets, and that you want the community to have a democratic vote on how economic dollars are spent. And in fact, why don't you think about you doing that? You find people. In the next episode, we'll research how to build an Ujima project in your neighborhood. How do you do it? How do you build an Ujima project in your neighborhood? Let's stop waiting for the system to fix itself and start demanding that they hand over the blueprint. Don't forget to answer a poll on Spotify or Substack. Keep asking the hard questions. Take care of our neighbors, and we'll see you next time.